You are not your diagnosis.
A medical chart is not your identity.
And vision loss does not define you. Your drive shows who you are.
And you are not alone.
Because we are driven too.
To be a beacon of strength, a champion of courage,
an advocate for hope.
You are not alone.
Because we are stronger together.
We drive the research for the cures we're finding.
We're fighting macular degeneration,
LCA,
Retinitis Pigmentosa,
and the entire spectrum of blinding retinal diseases.
We fund.
We fight.
We win.
We
are
the foundation
fighting blindness. Together,
we are fighting blindness.
Join the fight at fightingblindness.org.
Hi, my name is Megan Finnerty, and I am the host of this powerful community storytelling show in partnership with the Foundation Fighting Blindness. And right now, 5 individuals with true first-person stories are going to talk to us about the ways that they are defined by their resiliency, not their diagnoses. This is a Beacon Story podcast. We're taping it today. This is a live show. This is a Beacon Story podcast that is brought to you in partnership with the Allergan Foundation. And so we are going to get right into it and want to introduce you to tonight's storytellers. Actress and playwright Ellen Gould. Hi, Ellen.
Hey.
Scientist and shuttle expert Tracy B. Minish. Hi, Tracy. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Hi. Musician Charlie Cramer.
Hello.
Hi, Charlie. Entrepreneur and beauty expert, Carolyn Covington. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi.
And scientist Shannon Boyd, who runs her autonomous laboratory and who is a researcher at the University of Florida College of Medicine. Hi, Shannon.
Hey.
Thank you all for being here this evening. So this evening's experience is going to be pretty magical. You're going to hear stories about people along the spectrum who are experiencing some form of vision loss, as well as stories, but the stories aren't totally just about that. Their stories just intersect with that. Truly, these are stories of everyday people under extraordinary circumstances, and sometimes some extraordinary moments felt by everyday people. So what we hope you feel here is intimacy, authenticity. We're really here to create empathy and curiosity. At the end of all this, we hope you want to learn more about the Foundation's mission and maybe about any of our storytellers here today. Tonight is not a TED Talk. It's not Toastmasters or how-to or an inspirational speech. No one's going to give you a lecture on, like how to be clear of white canes, although you will hear about the use of white canes on today's show. Really, this is storytelling, which is based on visiting. And you know how to visit. You open your heart, you open your mind, and you pay attention to a person you want to feel closer to. And that's what we invite you to do right here, right now, is to get curious and get more connected to our storytellers. And without further ado, we are truly excited to bring up our first storyteller. Charlie Cramer is coming to us with a really slick setup from his home right now. And Charlie's going to tell us about his journey, both as a kid and an adult, with his diagnosis. Take it away, Charlie.
Thank you, Megan. So, hi, everyone. I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa when I was 5. It's something that runs in my family, actually. So my mom has it. It runs on my mom's side, and it goes all the way up our lineage. I have a sister, an older sister, and she has it as well. And we've kind of grown up as like a community with it, where I've always been really connected with my mom, my sister, and my dad. I have a very close family. And it was scary for my parents to have the idea that we could possibly have RP. What does RP mean? What is that? Basically, it makes me look like I'm looking through a boba straw. If anyone doesn't know what boba is, it's just a slightly bigger straw. So it's like looking through a small tunnel. Most people have 90 degrees of vision in every single direction, but I have 10. So it's really like a small, fine little point that I can see ahead of me. And then I also have something called night blindness, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. I can't see in the dark. If it's dark outside or if it's dark inside and you walk into a room like a movie theater, my eyes don't adjust to the darkness. It just stays dark forever. So that's that's really the journey that I go through. And I remember honestly having a very normal childhood. I was completely a normal kid because the way that I have RP in my family is that it actually progresses over time. So when I was really little, my vision felt pretty normal. I didn't really experience not seeing things on the side of me. I didn't bump into things that often. It wasn't until really I got into about middle school that I got to the point where I was really struggling with things. But I played high school baseball with RP. I played, basketball and soccer with my friends, and I was super active. Of course, music, as you can see right behind me, and my piano over here, is a huge aspect of my life. But when I was younger, I had no intentions of being a musician. I had every intentions of being in Major League Baseball, and that I'm glad it didn't happen, but it definitely did not happen. I think for me, the biggest challenge has really stemmed from watching my mom and my sister have a different journey than what I experience. So, when I was younger, my mom really wanted me to wear sunglasses. I wore them. I looked ridiculous. They were like these 90s gold tinted glasses, and I had a bowl cut. I just didn't want to be the blind kid. I think that's really the thing for me. I walked through a lot of my childhood just trying to fit in, just trying to be normal. And for the most part, nobody noticed anything. No one noticed that I was going through anything. But on the inside, I was losing my vision a lot faster than my sister was and my mom was. My mom, she was able to drive for quite some time. And so was my sister, actually. My sister's 2 years older than me. And she drove all throughout high school. And she actually drove me to school in our 1996 Ford Windstar. And I was totally set on having that Ford Windstar that I could drive my friends around in. I just expected, because my sister saw well enough, that I was going to be the same. My mom was able to drive. My sister was able to drive. I'm going to be able to drive. And that just absolutely was not the case. So I actually started learning how to drive from my dad. And we were all expecting that it was going to work out. And then I started to take my permit test. And I remember going to the doctor. And soon after that doctor's appointment, there was kind of like radio silence around my house about me getting my permit. And I just got lazy and I did not get it. I think I was 16. And you can get it at 15 and a half in California at the time, at least. And I just didn't get it. I was like, whatever, I'll get it when I get it. I'm not worried about it. And I remember going up to my sister one day and saying, you know what? I'm finally going to go get that permit. And I'll never forget the feeling of just like that feeling when your heart just like swells up. And she looked me right in the eyes. She said, "You haven't talked to mom and dad?" And I said, "No." I said, "Well, you can't drive. You have to talk to mom and dad. You're not allowed to." And that was the day that I found out that I was legally blind at the age of 15, 16. So for me, it was honestly, it was heartbreaking. I held it in and I acted as if it wasn't heartbreaking for quite some time. Cause again, right, I wanted to be the normal kid. But I should have been using a blind cane throughout that entire experience. My mom did help me. I went and got a blind cane. I had mobility training done, but then I just put it aside unless I was going to go to Disneyland or if I was going to go anywhere that I could use an advantage from my cane and it was some kind of cool thing. If I could do that, great. Disneyland, I got on all the rides through the exit. It was awesome. I was the coolest guy around. A concert, I remember going to see the Foo Fighters one time. I was supposed to be up on the back. The guy walked me right to the front, said, "You don't have to walk up those stairs." So like there's some positives for sure. But if it wasn't that, and I was in high school, I would just walk right into people all the time. And when you walk into someone and you're blind, because that's really, I like to say it, I'm legally blind, but I'm more blind than I am sighted. When you walk into someone and I can't see, right? And I hit them, but I don't have my cane, they think I'm absolutely crazy, right? Why are you running into me? You should be able to just look and move out of the way. But when you're in a situation like me, if I was using my cane, it's never my fault. It's always their fault. They're the ones not watching out. But for some reason, I was just enamored with being normal. was enamored with being normal. And it wasn't until later in my life, about 10 years after, I was in a really serious relationship, and my partner at the time helped me to just come to grips with the idea that it was best for me to really open up and share what I was doing. At the time, I was traveling around the country. I'm a Jewish musician specifically, so I lead spiritual music across the country and largely in Jewish circles. And I'd been flying around the country on airplanes and airports, not using a cane. All these people that I was leading these concerts and programs for had no idea that I was blind. And for me, it was really just an experience of just really really owning the fact that I am who I am, and sharing with people that I am blind, and sharing it within this community of the Jewish world has been astounding for me. So I started telling people, like, look, this is who I am. And I started using a blind cane every day. I heard someone say, you'll hear the story of using a white cane. I strictly use colored canes. I don't use a white cane. My canes are black, green, and pink. And I'm planning on getting every color of the rainbow that I possibly can, because I want to own and be connected to who I am. So I've been looking to create some kind of program with group singing, because that's my biggest passion. Getting a group of people together, almost like you're at the Hollywood Bowl at your favorite band's concert and everyone is singing. I love creating those moments. That's what my life's work is about. And I wanted to do something powerful like that. So I ended up gaining the guts to create something called Singing in the Dark, which is a blindfolded singing experience. And it's absolutely changed my life. It's an experience where people don't use their eyesight. They don't feel that judgment of people looking at them while they're singing, because it's so hard. You're so distracted by so many things when you use your eyes. And it's also a healing experience. I take people through meditation, and it's absolutely changed my outlook on who I am as a person. And it's made me actually fall in love with myself. And it's been an enormous gift. And for me, my story and my lesson has just been about finding the light in the darkness and learning that owning up to who I truly am. I never wanted to be the blind musician. I'm blind and I'm a musician, and I love who I am. And I think it's such a beautiful, powerful thing to be able to do that. Thank you so much for hearing and listening to my story.
Charlie, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with such thoughtfulness, such sense of humor, and so much self-awareness. We're really, really grateful for your story today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also, Charlie, want to, I'm just like picturing little Charlie with his sunglasses on and being like, no, mom. Meanwhile, most kids think they look very cool in sunglasses, but I understand it was totally different for you. And that is the kind of like insight and I think real thoughtfulness that we're able to get when people tell us about their experiences that are different from ours, or maybe some of you, the audience, can really relate to Charlie's story. But one of the real things that I think is so compelling about Charlie's story is that even within his own family, he's able to articulate how everyone had really different experiences, even though they share a common diagnosis. And that's one of the things that we're so thankful for in today's show, is these like true personal insights driven by everyday people and their thoughtful stories and their memories. So with that, Charlie Cramer, thanks for your story and your sense of humor. Now I'd like to thank the Foundation Fighting Blindness. They're presenting this show as a way of creating an affirming community. That's what they do online and in person. And this is a new time, a new way that they're working on it during the pandemic. The foundation was founded in 1971 by a passionate group of families as a way to find treatments and cures for inherited retinal diseases that were affecting their loved ones. The foundation's goal is really clear and focused. It is to drive the research that can lead to preventative treatments and vision restoration for the spectrum of degenerative retinal diseases. And today, the foundation is the world's leading private funder of retinal disease research, including identification of more than 270 genes linked to retinal disease, and the launch of more than 40 clinical trials for potential treatments. It is an astounding amount of work. The foundation is sharing these stories tonight so that our listeners and our viewers can understand how people can deal with these diagnoses, as well as how we can all understand the everyday moments that make our storytellers' lives like and unlike everyone else's. So we really want to thank the foundation for bringing us together this evening. And we also want to say, again, this is a part of a taping for a podcast brought to us in the future by the Allergan Foundation. It's going to be part of the Beacon Stories podcast. So with that, thanks so much for bringing us all together. We also, later in today's show, are going to hear about some of the research specifically being done in this area and funded by the foundation. With that, I'm excited to bring up Carolyn Covington with a story of resiliency and entrepreneurship. Take it away, Carolyn.
Hello, everyone. Can I ask a question? What's your unthinkable? Think about it. What is the one thing that could happen to you and you think that you would never recover from? I never imagined that I would be faced with a life-altering challenge that would turn my world upside down like a twister, and yet stand me upright and set me on a path of living my best life, God's purpose and His plan for me. You know, life happens. And as I was building my beauty empire, my diagnosis tried to take my power. And it was back in 1974, I was labeled as a troubled teen in search of a trade in cosmetology. And I had a big dream of becoming a famous hairstylist, traveling the world, and owning a chain of salons. And you know, God blessed my dreams, and He actually let me make it to the top, but only to watch it all disappear right before my very own eyes. I spent 30 whole years, and I dedicated and devoted my life to spas, salons, fashions, and beauty products. But I remember in the year 2001 is when I started to have my vision changes. I can remember looking at the computer and it was blurry, and the right side of the appointments had all been canceled or they mysteriously disappeared. And I started walking into walls and doors that were clearly shut. And my staff had started to notice that something was wrong. So I remember one evening while I was driving to meet friends for dinner, I don't even remember stopping at the stop sign to the right of me. And at that point, the street lights and the car lights had started to temporarily blind me. But I remember I continued on because all I could think about was having my favorite Thai soup at dinner. So the waiter brought out a big bowl of soup that was filled to the top, and I pulled it close to me and I started eating, only to realize that the bowl was almost empty. At that point, I could see everyone at the table staring at me. And when I looked down, I had spilled soup all over the table and down the left side of my jacket. I was so embarrassed and I think I was a little ticked off that no one thought to say something while this was occurring. So I called the waiter over and I said, "Excuse me, sir, is there a hole in my soup bowl?" And everyone laughed and he picked it up, he wiped it off and he said, "No, ma'am." So I continued to clean myself up and I quietly slipped away from dinner. And I remember on the ride home, I started thinking of all the different changes in my life. And that night, as I pulled into my garage, I knocked the right mirror completely off the side of my little sports car. And I knew that moment it was time to go see about this. And so I asked my husband to take me to the appointment, and we were on our way. And I was thinking, oh, I probably just need some glasses. I'll get some really cute, nice designer frames. But that is when my unthinkable happened. I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, and the doctor said that it's a rare genetic eye disease, and that at first you'll lose your peripheral, and then you'll have night blindness. And eventually you would go totally blind. So he said after that, "Is there anyone in your family that's blind?" And I said, my mother had lost her sight to glaucoma, but we never heard of retinitis pigmentosa. And then he said, "Oh, did I tell you that there's no cure?" After hearing those words, I knew all I could see was his mouth moving. And I didn't hear another word that he said. And so at that point, I was so afraid and I got angry. And I said, well, how am I going to be able to see beauty or create beauty if there is no sight? And how am I going to be a blind person in the beauty industry? But then I realized that it was in God's hands, but I was saying, why me? Why now? You know, I'm at the top of my career. And so I thank God for a praying husband. We went home and we prayed that they would find a cure before I would go blind. And I decided not to tell my sons or definitely not my business partners. I was in denial. And I decided just to continue on business as usual. And I continued to open more salons and spas. But in 2014, my mother passed, and I had to grieve my mother along with grieving the loss of my sight and my independence. I had been declared legally blind. I had to give up my driving privileges. I was being dropped off, picked up at everyone else's convenience. And I realized it was time to just go home. But I was so afraid about going home because I knew that I would be isolated and I would shut myself off from the world. It would just be me and my little dog, Remy, home alone all week. I had to feel my way through my house while enduring the darkness. And I would fall up the stairs and down the stairs with all sorts of bumps and bruises. Sometimes I didn't know if it was daytime or nighttime or even what day of the week it was. But I knew on Sunday that I would leave the house because we would go to church. And my husband had to color coordinate my clothing for me and help me pick out the perfect pair of shoes. I never imagined that I would need someone else to help me to make my fashion statement. And he was very encouraging. He'd say, "You look beautiful, but hurry up. We're going to be late for church." So we would leave for church, and I would hope we could slip in and slip out, and no one would notice. No one would ask questions. No one would offer to help. I didn't want anyone's help. I knew that God was the only person that could help me, and I wanted to work this out myself. So back home, just Remy and I, no one would call, no one would stop by, but it's okay. I understand it's a busy world that we live in. And I only had a few people that I would keep in touch with anyway. But daily, I started having these wine tastings, and my guest list was rather short. Really, it was a private tasting. It would just be me. And I realized that that was definitely not helping my situation. I had started to gain so much weight, and I would avoid the mirrors, the very thing that would define me. I used to look in the mirror, and I see this courageous, confident, compassionate businesswoman. Yeah, a fearless leader. And that day I looked in the mirror, and no one looked back. Imagine that. I started to cry and tears were just running all down my face. And I cried out and I asked God to please help me to accept that I am really going blind and to give me a vision and a purpose to get back up and start living again. But I had to choose faith over fear and swallow my pride to get help so that I could later help others. So I called the Division of Services for the Blind. And they sent out the counselor. And she said, "First, I'm going to send out the mobility specialist, and she'll teach you how to use your white cane." Well, my pride stepped back up and it said, "Oh no, I will never be caught out of this house with a white cane. You may as well put a sticky on my forehead that says, 'Watch out for the blind lady.'" But little did I know that my white cane would be my navigation cane. It would be the start to my independence. And it would cut back on some of the bumps and bruises. Well, second, she wanted me to go to the low vision specialist. And after my assessment, Dr. Whitaker told me all about the Foundation Fighting Blindness and how the chapter was going to have a walk and to raise money for research to find a cure. And that gave me so much hope. And I wanted to be a part of it. But the third thing was I had to go to start my rehabilitation. So I went to Raleigh Lions Clinic for the Blind, and there I met Mr. Steve Murphy, and he had RP as well. And he said to me, you know, there's life after blindness. And that meant so much. He became my mentor. And he had set me up for my assistant technology classes to learn the iPhone and the iPad. But I couldn't quite wrap myself around talking to this little bossy lady and all these commands: swipe left, up, down, one finger tap, two finger, three, tap, tap, tap. I was so overwhelmed. And my instructor, Mr. Lee Davis, who also happened to be blind, he said to me, you do not have to learn it all in one day. Learning to be blind is a process within itself. And he became my second mentor. So I went back to Mr. Murphy to tell him all about my vision of starting a nonprofit, Insightful Visionaries, and how we would empower the blind and visually impaired through advocacy, education, arts and entertainment, and wellness. So our first event was a fashion show, and we had both sighted and blind models, and they walked the runway together, counting their steps. And next, Anastasia and Chris from the IFB Solutions asked us to host their blind singing competition. Wow. I knew I was back in the game. So I called up all of the top hairstylists, makeup artists, fashion designers. I wanted it all. I wanted all the glitz and the glam, but it wasn't for us to see. I wanted everyone else to see blindness in a better light, and it lifted our self-esteem. But the ultimate goal for our Insightful Visionaries was to provide education and employment for the blind and visually impaired through a reflexology and aromatherapy training. But the COVID-19 has placed all of that on pause. But I am confident that the end is in sight and we will resume soon. And I want to thank all of my blind mentors that have held my hand through this journey, and the Foundation Fighting Blindness for all of their research and putting the spotlight on blindness, and for all of the opportunities that they have given me to shine, so that I will be able to share with others that there is life after blindness. Thank you.
Carolyn, thank you so much for your story. It is such a joy to hear your passion, your enthusiasm, your resiliency. Oh, it's okay, Carolyn. I was like, you could say hi back if you wanted to, but that's okay.
Hi.
We told everybody to be so quiet. I'm so sorry. But Carolyn, I am so touched by your thoughtfulness and your vulnerability and the way in which you were able to so gracefully articulate, like so many of us would be, you got news you didn't want to accept, so you didn't.
Yeah.
And right. And it is hard. And I think you have done such a beautiful job, a masterful job talking about that in a way that is so relatable. And then you pivot and your story is filled with so much grace. So also, I love the part where you say, thank God for a man who prays, or praying man.
Yes. It's
really beautiful.
For him.
Amen. Carolyn, thank you so much for your story.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. We are, thank God, so good. I'm like a little bit verklempt. We are excited to bring up our next storyteller. Shannon Boy is here to share with us about the work she does, fighting blindness literally, but her story is also about her whole, not her whole career, but her career's journey to bringing her to this work and the way her work impacts so many others. It's all yours, Shannon.
Thank you, Megan, so much for having me. I am an incredibly lucky person. I work in a career that I love, absolutely love. I get to wake up every morning and do something that potentially is going to help someone one day. I think being a translational scientist is the best. I don't wake up and do science where I'm just tinkering, kind of trying to figure out how one protein talks to another protein. I don't spend years doing that. I actually have the potential to impact someone's life through the translational science that I'm doing. So it's the best. It's also the best because I get to work with my husband. I've talked with many people that say that they could never work with their spouse, that it would never work. They'd kill each other. But for me, it's sort of like I can't envision doing anything differently. So we've been a team for over 15 years now. I'm an associate professor of pediatrics and the associate chief of the Division of Cellular and Molecular Therapy at the University of Florida. My husband, Sanford, is director of the Vector Core and the Powell Gene Therapy Center. We work well as a team, I would say, because we have very different skill sets. He loves molecular biology. I love neuroscience. I like to write. He's the world's worst speller. I'm more of a forest girl, where he's more of a trees guy. And it's these different skill sets that, when they come together, have lent themselves to scientific advances that we're both really proud of. So we've worked together for a number of years to develop therapies that have been licensed by companies, so small companies, medium companies, even huge companies. And some things went right, but I would say that there were a lot more things that went wrong. It was so strange to kind of hand off something that we had been working on for a decade to a group of people that, of course, were very smart, but they didn't have that same depth of knowledge that we did. So it was hard to hand those things off. And on occasion, we saw business decisions overriding science decisions, and that just wasn't okay. The system wasn't working in a way that we felt was going to help children and adults suffering from various forms of blindness. So fairly recently, we actually decided to form our own company because we weren't busy enough. So this spring, we actually formed a company called Cena Therapeutics, which is a company focused on developing gene therapies for various forms of inherited retinal disease. And this was made possible not just because of the science, but because of very important financial backers, including, number one, the Foundation Fighting Blindness and Hatteras Venture Partners, among others. So I'm serving as the Chief Scientific Officer, and my husband, Sanford, is serving as the Chief Technology Officer. And I have to say, it's been really, really fun for us to have one toe in academia, where there's a lot of sort of freedom to do what you want, and then one toe in industry, where there's milestones and timelines and everything moves very quickly. It's been awesome to have one toe in each of those worlds. So we're really excited to see where Cena goes. We're excited to finally have a little bit more control over the scientific direction that our projects take. But as I said, I'm an extremely lucky person. I love my job. But what is it that they say about luck? It's the intersection of preparation and opportunity. And I have to say that this fairy tale existence that I feel like I currently have definitely didn't come without some elbow grease. I'm often asked why I entered the field of gene therapy for retinal disease. And I don't honestly have any relatives that suffer from a form of blindness. I wasn't motivated by that in particular. But when I was in high school, and even before then, I always just loved science. It was art and science all the time. I kind of didn't know which way I was going to go. But it wasn't until high school, really, that I made that decision. And I should say high school was a little interesting for me because I went to an all-girls private Catholic school that cost a lot of money at the time. My parents were working class, and they spent pretty much every dime that they had to send me to that school. And of course, as a whiny teenager, I probably didn't appreciate it that much then, but I very much do so now, because that formed really the basis for everything for me. And they always felt very, very strongly about instilling in me a very strong education so I could do with my life whatever I wanted to. So that affected me in many ways. And as I said, it wasn't until high school that I really decided which direction I wanted to take. And that was all because of my AP biology teacher named Cindy Richards. She was someone that just for the first time could really see my passion for science. She saw my potential, and she was one of the only teachers in that school, admittedly, that didn't care how much money my parents made. And that was a big deal. I remember one lesson in particular. It was during the O.J. Simpson trial, where Mrs. Richards taught us about DNA fingerprinting and how someone's DNA could actually be used to link them to a crime. So it was sort of my first foray into using science and tying it to pop culture, and it just absolutely had me hooked. So it was really Mrs. Richards that sent me on the path towards pursuing a life in science. So after high school, I went into college, where I pursued marine biology. You'll notice that many researchers are actually frustrated marine biologists because they realize about halfway through college that you don't get paid to train dolphins. So very quickly after deciding to major in marine biology, I realized I needed to sort of go into more of a biomedical direction. So I did an internship with Dr. Paul Linzer at the Whitney Marine Lab, which is an offshoot of the University of Florida. And that was when the next chapter of my life really started taking place. He really sat me down, again, saw my potential and said, this isn't the last step. Don't just get your bachelor's degree. You need to go to graduate school. You really need to take ownership of this. Keep going, get another degree. And so he took me and my fellow interns on a tour of the University of Florida campus. And that was it for me. I decided based on his advice that I should apply. I did. I got in. I was officially a Gator. Go Gators. So at the University of Florida, I pursued my doctorate in neuroscience. And actually, I was lucky to be given a thesis project that focused on developing a gene therapy for an inherited retinal disease. And I didn't realize it at the time, but UF is seriously a mecca for gene therapy research. A lot of the earliest discoveries in this field were made at the University of Florida, and I have the world's best collaborators to work with. So it was at that point that I was completely hooked, and I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So on to the rest of my life. What to do after graduate school? I needed to start my own lab and my independent career. But there were definitely struggles along the way. And I would say that I struggled most with two things. First, as I started my independent lab, I looked around and there were very few women in the field. It certainly is a male-dominated field with very few women, especially in leadership positions. So there were times I felt very alone. I did have several male colleagues that enjoyed bringing me down whenever I succeeded at something. They liked putting me in my place. And there were many years with lots of tears, but I kept at it. I kept slogging through the politics, and slowly but surely, my skin began to thicken. So I thank those men. Thank you. And so it really, probably in my mid-30s, the veil lifted, and I realized that the only way to sort of combat those naysayers or to prove them wrong was just to be successful. So that's the answer. But therein lies the second struggle: how to be successful as an independent researcher doing gene therapy for inherited retinal disease. To do that, you have to be grant funded. And it's exceptionally difficult to find grant funding in this field. There are not many federal dollars to go around. And when you're a junior scientist, you're putting a grant into the NIH and you're competing with extremely established investigators. So when those reviewers get together, they're much more prone to say, yes, we're going to fund Dr. Smith, who's been doing this for 30 years, than they are Shannon Boyd, who's only been doing this for 6 months. So that's where the Foundation Fighting Blindness really came in and changed my life and my entire career, really. The FFB places a lot of emphasis on, helping out the little guy, looking at junior investigators with potential. And they had a grant mechanism called the Individual Investigator Award. And I applied to that grant. And I still remember where I was and the happy dance I did around the table in that room when I found out that I got that grant. And what was wonderful about that grant is that it wasn't a huge amount of money. It was a little bit amount of seed money that allowed me to generate the preliminary data that I needed to apply for one of those larger grants from the federal government. And that's exactly what happened. So I really owe the FFB everything in terms of my career and where I am today. So there were definitely struggles, but I don't say any of this to invoke a woe is me reaction from my audience. I think these experiences were gifts. Those past hardships have revealed themselves as good fortunes. That insecurity in my fancy high school, the fight to succeed as a woman in a male-dominated field, and the fight to get funded made me into the fighter that I am today. So here I am running my own lab, serving as CSO of my own company, and I honestly cannot imagine doing anything else. I love that I have the ability to potentially help blind people see. It's transformative. And being in the Department of Pediatrics, I'm especially passionate about pediatric blindness. These children motivate me so much. Their photographs dot the walls of my office and my lab because they are my inspiration. And I make sure that I interact with them as often as I can. And I make sure my staff, my students, and my postdocs interact with patients as much as they can. And one of those patients that I had the pleasure of meeting is named Creed. He came to the University of Florida when he was just 3 years old with his mom because he was having trouble seeing. So he was coming to see an inherited retinal disease specialist there. And at the time, he was diagnosed with a condition called LCA, or Leber congenital amaurosis. And there are a number of different genes, about 20 different genes that can lead to LCA. And at the time, we didn't know which one was causing Creed's LCA. But the interesting thing was that there was really only one set of advanced research studies that were being undertaken at the time to cure LCA, and it was specifically for the RPE65 form. So his mom submitted his blood for genotyping to figure out what genetic mutation he carried, and she waited. She waited and waited. And then on her birthday, she got a call that Creed carried mutations in RPE65. And she was ecstatic as a mom can be finding out that her son has a mutation in one of his genes. But this was the gene for which a gene therapy was being developed. So she was ecstatic. So she wanted him to be involved very much in experimental clinical trials for this disease because she didn't have a lot of money and it can be very expensive to receive these therapies. So she did everything within her power to prepare Creed to be enrolled in these trials. She created homemade tests in her garage to get him ready. She made mazes that he could navigate through so that he could do it even better when he went up to the clinical trial sites. But she waited and she waited to be called. She finally got called. He went up to get tested for enrolling in this trial, but unfortunately he was too young. And a lot of the things that they do to patients when they're testing them for eligibility for enrollment in these trials is they dark adapt them. So they would put Creed inside a dark room for a couple of hours. Now, what does a 4 and 5-year-old do when they're in a dark room for a couple hours? They fall asleep. And what do they do when they wake up? They're cranky. So Creed just was too young to perform the tests that were necessary to be enrolled in this trial. And his mom was heartbroken. So they waited again. She got called again by the same clinical trial site to see if he could finally do those tests now that he was a little bit older. The story repeated itself. Unfortunately, Creed was unable to perform the tests necessary to enroll in the trial. She was devastated. I was devastated. And we all went back to waiting. And now it was time to wait for the FDA to say that this gene therapy would be approved for broader use, as in anybody could get it. We waited a long time together. My children at the time played with Creed on a couple of occasions. They're around his age, and they were acutely aware that he was visually impaired. I recall one end table that Creed had trouble navigating around in my house. I remember his cane, and we all kept waiting. A couple of years later, I'm happy to report Creed wound up being one of the first 3 children in the United States to receive the gene therapy for RPE65 LCA2, which is called Luxturna. And I'm even more happy to report that his insurance covered that entire cost. And really, this has been transformative for Creed and his family, and for me, watching this happen since, knowing him since he was 3. His mom sent me videos just days after his treatment, and you could already see a difference. There's a video of him sort of looking for her husband in the dark about 2 days after the treatment, and you could see a difference. That year, he was able to look for his Easter eggs for the first time. He was able to see a rainbow. He's able to dive into a pool. So his mom, Sarah, sends me these videos and pictures all the time, and every single one I get gives me goosebumps. My children have since played with Creed, and he was a totally different child. This time, they weren't walking in the house. He didn't have a cane. They were swimming together in a pool, jumping off the side. No worries, no cane, no bumping into anything. Creed is now a preteen, and he's doing amazing. So it has been a fantastic journey to ride with him and to see what a difference Foundation Fighting Blindness can make in the lives of a patient like Creed. And all of that really speaks to the beauty of translational research. It can take a really long time. There can be a lot of waiting, and you can face a lot of struggles along the way. But out the back end, for people like Creed, it is totally worth it. When I started my career a little over 15 years ago, children were given a diagnosis like LCA, and the ophthalmologist would tell their parents, I'm sorry, go teach your kid Braille and get him or her a cane. But today we have so much more hope because so many more treatments are available, not just for the RPE65 form of LCA, but for other forms and for other diseases. There's been exponential growth in this space, not just for pediatric blindness like LCA, but for many other inherited retinal diseases like retinitis pigmentosa. And the Foundation Fighting Blindness has been the fuel behind that growth. I commend them for getting behind the little guys or gals like me a few years ago, and to all the other, and for getting behind all of the other junior scientists that they fund. And my message to those other junior scientists is that elbow grease works. Ignore the haters, live your dream. The future could be brighter, literally and figuratively, because of you. Thank you for your time.
Shannon, thank you so much for your story. We are so lucky to have you. You did such a beautiful job breaking down the specifics of the kind of research you do and the impact it has on people's lives. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I also want to say to everyone, the first time Shannon told us this story, I was like, oh, happy ending. Her story ends like she helps this child and he's like lives this fuller, richer life. And then she's like, and since then we've discovered all these other treatments. And I was like, oh my God, Shannon, that's amazing. Keep doing so much research, So I'm very excited, Shannon. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Heck yeah. We also want to say, this is an awareness campaign a little bit for the Foundation Fighting Blindness, but this is also a way to help them translate their work to everyday people to really help you see when they make these grants, it like translates into real work. They really are changing people's lives. So Shannon, thanks for talking about that. We in fact have a little message from the foundation right now.
A diagnosis does not define me.
And vision loss doesn't determine my character.
It's our drive that shows who we are.
And we are here to let those challenged with blinding retinal diseases know
That we are driven too.
To be a beacon of strength, a champion of courage.
An advocate for hope.
We fund.
we fight.
We win.
We
We are the Foundation
Fighting Blindness. Join the fight at fightingblindness.org.
Thank you so much for that. I'd like to bring up our next storyteller, Ellen Gould.
Hey, Megan.
Hi. Oh, go ahead.
So, if I were to give this story that I'm about to tell you a name, it would be My Big Break. We humans are prey to all kinds of accidents, trip and fall, a genetic alteration. Accidents are no fun, but they do give us our most memorable stories, sometimes our life-changing stories, especially when those accidents get in the way of our dreams. My dream from the time I was a very little girl was to sing and to act, to be in the theater. I just never dreamed I would end up writing my own solo musicals, but then that's later in the story. I did not know that I was losing vision from the age of 7. I just knew that I couldn't make out the chalk marks on the blackboard, or no matter how close I sat or what new glasses I got. My teachers started sending home report cards with, "She's one of the smartest kids in the class, but she doesn't work up to her ability." At 7, I felt like a failure. At 15, I was finally diagnosed with Stargardt's disease. It's an inherited juvenile form of macular degeneration. More commonly, you see it in older people. This genetic accident, well, it made me legally blind with dark shadows in the center of my vision. It also made it really hard for me to see regular print without benefit of a mega magnifier. I don't have one here. And they were in scarce supply in the mid-60s when I was growing up. It was a real accessibility wasteland. But I found that if I pressed my face in close enough to the page, I could quickly memorize everything that was on it, down to the last comma. This quirky ability helped me a lot when I began my career in New York City in the early 70s, because auditions were mostly cold readings, tough enough for people who were fully sighted. But for me, I was terrified to let anybody know that I had a vision problem, especially after sharing that fact with a few casting directors in my first auditions and hearing a quick and really angry, "Next!" But I was crazy determined, and armed with this peculiar ability to memorize at a glance, I managed, after 5 years of really small roles, to kind of build up my resume. And then my first big break, I got a part in a workshop at the Public Theater that was going to be performed on the very same stage that premiered A Chorus Line. The morning of my first rehearsal, I was dressed in my downtown best, my hair and my makeup agonizingly perfect after more than an hour in the magnifying mirror. So by this time I was running a little late, and I decided I'd better spring for a taxi. Didn't want to mess this up. Traffic was bad that morning, and there was this huge Con Edison truck, and it was blocking the intersection on 9th Street and 5th Avenue. So I had to walk between the back of the truck and the car next to it so I could get out on the street and hail a taxi. The cabs were just whizzing by as I was facing the oncoming traffic, my hand permanently extended in the air in case I could grab anything that went by. I can't see the little light on the top of the taxi that tells you if one's available. By this time, I'm thinking, oh shit, I'm going to be late for my first rehearsal. And then I thought I saw a cab. It was pulling out of its lane, and it started coming fast at me, and it stopped close, so close I thought it was going to hit me. So I took a step back and I disappeared. I heard more than felt the crack as my ribs hit something metal. I also heard the sound of the cabbie gun his car and take the corner as fast as he could. I guess he didn't want to deal with the fact that his prospective passenger had fallen into a manhole. Thankfully, I fell in sideways, wedged in with just my upper body sticking out. I looked around in the street and there was no one there, but I saw some shadows walking about a block away in front of the arch at Washington Square Park. I knew there was no way that I was going to be able to take a big enough breath to call out to them. But then my early classical voice training kicked in. Use your high voice. It'll give you maximum strength for minimum effort. I managed a shallow breath, and then, somebody help me! I repeated it over and over like a dotty diva delivering her dying aria. Somebody help me! I saw the shadows right in front of the arch. They were running directly at me, and then suddenly there they were looking down. Are you all right? My saving angels were Italian tourists. Of course, Italians, drawn by the sound of my soulful aria. My angels found a phone booth. There was no cell phone in those days, and called 911. And as the ambulance was speeding me away to the emergency room at St. Vincent's Hospital, I thought, oh shit, I'm gonna miss my first rehearsal. 3 hours later, lying in a hospital bed, the doctor broke the news. 3 broken ribs and a badly bruised kidney, along with his prescription, 3 months of complete bed rest. Damn it, I thought, imagining that beautiful stage at the public theater without me on it. There goes my big break. I spent the next 3 months in bed writing my first solo musical, Confessions of a Reformed Romantic, about the gut punch of getting your dreams dashed. And then with the settlement I got from Con Edison, whose workers had gone off on a coffee break without putting a protection around the hole, I developed the show enough to manage to sell it to an off-Broadway theater to produce it. Confessions became a cult hit with a rave review in the New York Times. And I'd finally gotten my big break, but in a way I would never have imagined. My career had taken off. And from that point on, I wrote and performed my own solo musicals, all leading up to the dream come true moment when I got 2 Emmys for one of those shows. But here's the kicker. In a glorious accident of fate, that award-winning show debuted at the Public Theater on the very same stage as the workshop. You know, the workshop I would have been in if I hadn't fallen into the manhole. Last year, I wrote and performed my latest musical at a New York theater festival called Seeing Stars. It's about 5 women who are legally blind, but who share a special kind of sight. Foundation Fighting Blindness was wonderful in supporting that show. And through their communications department, they reached out to people all around the country. I had people coming in even from California to see it. It was a remarkable experience because, well, I wrote the show because people with visual impairment rarely get to see themselves represented on stage. I wrote it because those who we say have disabilities often develop unique abilities that can inspire and give hope to the rest of us. I wrote it because I'm one of those women. And at this stage in my life, I'm finally daring to be out and proud about my own struggle. You know, putting all of this together, the story for this event today, it made me wonder if, without realizing it, I also wrote Seeing Stars to tell stories about the accidents that happen to all of us, whether through genetics or on the streets of our lives. Accidents that shape our character and can put us on a more fulfilling path than the one we'd originally dreamed for ourselves. Those are the stories of struggle that, with luck, determination, and more than a little bit of humor, can almost always turn into tales of triumph, or at least our next big break. Thank you for listening.
Ellen, thank you so much for your story. Oh my gosh, you were so expressive. You were so over the top. I laughed out loud. The thought of you performing an aria, it was just hilarious. And your alliterations, your sense of humor.
Thank you for noticing those. I worked on those.
Of course.
And I love your glasses, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your story, but I also want to thank you for your advocacy and your thoughtfulness in representing stories from not just yourself here today, but really telling the stories of so many Americans who have retinal diseases or have some vision loss. You are such an ambassador, and you have so much charm and thoughtfulness. We're grateful to hear your story tonight, but I can only imagine how many people are grateful that you are out there telling their stories too.
Thank you, Megan.
Of course.
Thank you for all you're doing and for your empathy and for all the stories tonight. They were so moving.
We are really lucky, you know, all of our storytellers tonight, you know, Charlie and Shannon and Carolyn and you, and now we are going to close with Tracy. So I'm going to bring them up right now. Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you.
Tracy Minish is a scientist, a researcher. I also mentioned he is a shuttle expert, so you can imagine where he has worked in the past. But today his story is about a different part of his life, a little different slice of his life. It's the floor is yours, Tracy.
All right, thank you. During my 36-year NASA career, I have trained shuttle astronauts, I have served as a branch chief, I have traveled all around the good planet Earth, helping international partners set up their control centers, and I'm currently the Mission Control Center Operations Manager. I have retinitis pigmentosa. To be specific, I have PRPF 31. I've been legally blind since I was in high school, and I have less than 5 degrees in my field of vision left. So if you look through like a garden hose and took out about 30 to 40% of the pixels, you would see what I see. In the summer of 2011, I was in Moscow at the Volga. The Volga is an old hotel with tall ceilings, dim lighting, lots of steps up and lots of steps down. That night, I got up to go to the bathroom, and when I shut the door, I immediately knew something had gone terribly wrong. I thought to myself, Houston, we have a problem. I had locked myself out of my room wearing only my Fruit of the Loom whitey tighties. I did not have a cane. I did not have a cell phone. I had no teammates on the same floor. I did a quick inspection of my underwear. They were clean, and I knew that my mom would be proud of her little boy. I made my way to the elevator, and as I waited for it to open, I started thinking, what if somebody's on there? What if it's a female? Doors open, nobody screamed. So far, so good. So I got on the elevator, and there was this big array of buttons, and I could not see the numbers. So since I was in Russia, I decided to play Russian roulette, and I just hit the bottommost button. Bingo! I'd chosen wisely, and I'd made it to the lobby area. So before I was going to enter the lobby, I decided I would just, in my mind, think about the obstacle course that lay before me. I would have to go into the lobby area, stepping down 3 or 4 steps. I'd have to turn to the right. It'd be about 5 meters, and then I'd go up 2 steps. I'd go across 20 more meters, go down 2 steps, turn to the right, and there'd be a front desk. Just to psych myself up, I started saying, USA, USA, because I was representing NASA in my country in the Volga Olympics, and I would not do a faceplant in my whitey tighties. Like a ninja, I eventually made it to the front desk, and I asked the person there to give me a key and a towel. Now the towel you would think would be to wrap up my Fruit of the Loom, but I decided instead that I would use it as a tether. I didn't think my Russian comrade would like it if I grabbed hold of his arm and we paraded through the lobby with me wearing my underwear. I had 3 lessons learned from that journey. First one was keep my cell phone on me at all times. Second one was don't totally shut the bathroom door. And the third one was boxers, boxers, boxers. You know, I learned a lot while traveling blind to unfamiliar places, but nothing, really nothing could prepare me for the phone call and the trip I'd made 4 years ago. We have our oldest son, Tyler. He has an adventurous heart. You know, he likes to hike and scuba dive, and he's been to Peru, Norway, New Zealand, Alaska, Hawaii. And he was in Africa on a 10-day safari, where the last day he was going to go scuba diving off the coast of Zanzibar. It was actually it was actually a Sunday night at about 10:30 p.m. It was July the 17th of 2016 when Sherry and I received the phone call telling us that Tyler had come up from scuba diving and he was paralyzed on his right side and he was paralyzed below his sternum. They had to drag him on the boat. These are difficult words for any parent to hear. Sherry and I cried together. We got down on our knees and prayed together. And we got up and decided we had to make a plan. Now at NASA, we have the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. It's the world's largest swimming pool. And we train astronauts on how to do spacewalks. And we also have a hyperbaric chamber there. So even though it's near midnight, I called our good friend Mike Fox, who's over those chamber runs. And Mike told us under no circumstances could Tyler get on a commercial flight to come home because flying at that altitude could release nitrogen bubbles and possibly kill him. So when I got off the phone, I knew immediately I'd be going to Africa. I had a passport. I was familiar with international travel, and failure was not an option. So that morning I went into work, got my passport out of my desk. I stopped by and told my division chief I'd be gone for a few days. And then I went by CVS, the Minute Clinic, got the vaccinations I needed, and got online to buy an airline ticket to Zanzibar. I would be flying first to London. And then I would have a 6-hour layover. Next, I would fly to Cairo, have a 4-hour layover, and then I'd make it to Tanzania. When I got to Tanzania, I would actually take a plane over to the island of Zanzibar and make my way to the hospital. The ticket was $10,000, and I'd be leaving at 4 p.m. on Monday. My wife, her passport had expired, so she would stay home and run mission rescue Tyler from Houston. Sherry and I got together. I threw 3 shirts, 3 pair of shorts, and 3 pair of boxers in a duffel bag. As we were going to the airport, we heard from Tyler for the first time, and his voice was strong. He just sounded so courageous. He had already had a chamber run, and he had gotten use of his right arm, was still paralyzed below the sternum. Deep breath. Well, Tyler was, he told us that if he had to, he'd become the best wheelchair athlete in the world. And hearing Tyler's words just emboldened me for the trip that lay before me. After 31 hours, I made it to Tanzania. When I got off the plane, I kind of just tried to follow the shadows to go through customs. And for some reason, I ended up outside. Nobody checked my passport. Nobody had taken my crisp $100 bill that I was going to use to get a visa. To make things worse, Sherry had arranged for someone to meet me there, and they were going to help me get to the island and to the hospital. My phone was dead. But some way I managed to get to a small airport, bought a ticket, and when I got on the plane, I realized I was sitting on a bench, no seatbelt. I'd bought a ticket on a skydiving plane, and they had not given me a parachute. They ended up dropping me off after the wheels touched down, and I made my way to the hospital. Tyler and I just had such a joyous reunion. And the good news was that Tyler had another chamber run. So he was actually able to walk, but he had no feeling below his sternum, and he was having to have a catheter. The hospital he was in the inner city, way away from the resort area. It had no air conditioning. It had shower head between the toilet and the sink, and the whole time we were there, had 3 to 4 inches of standing water. It had no cafeteria, and it had no food service for its patients, and it had lots of mosquitoes. Our daily routine was that the local doctor would pick us up. He would drive us out to the resort area, where we were blessed to have a hyperbaric chamber, and he would get 3 runs, and then about 9 p.m., we would ride back, and the doctor would drop us off at the hospital. On every trip, we got stopped multiple times by the police and the military, and they had machine guns, so it was really pretty scary. After about 7 days of this doctor getting off work and doing this, he did not see improvement in Tyler, so he decided to stop treatments. This was totally against what we were hearing from our doctors in the U.S. Now, on day 1, Sherry and I had started trying to figure out how we were going to get Tyler home. And we found out that it would require a Learjet flying at low altitude. So, and $1.2 million. And of course, as you can imagine, the insurance company said not covered. So Sherry and I looked at all our options. We thought about selling our house, starting to GoFundMe, cashing out our 401k, using a boat. But none of those added up to $1.2 million, and we needed to get Tyler home quick and fast. So on August 1st, the insurance company actually called and said they would cover the airfare. And August 1st is Sherry's birthday, so best birthday present ever. We were picked up by an ambulance, taken to the Learjet sitting on the runway. They'd be making 7 stops along the way. After they came out to check our passports, they took me off the plane and they put me in the airport. When I was getting off the plane, I told the pilot that if I'm not back in 30 minutes, take off without me. Because I knew there were regulations. This is a long flight. We had a tight schedule. And if you take too long, it just wouldn't be possible. So I was sitting in this little room they put me in, and I'd been sitting there for 10 minutes. And I finally said, I got to do something. So I opened up the door, walked out into the middle of the area, and I bent over, grabbed my knees, and I just started pretending I had dry heaves. I was throwing myself into it. And just in a few minutes, several people surrounded me. Next thing I know, they were putting me on the plane, and we were cleared to launch. You know, at NASA, we don't take off, we launch. So that was such a joyous moment for us to actually be on our way home. We met Sherry in New Orleans, where Tyler went through 2 more weeks of treatment in a hyperbaric chamber with some amazing doctors there. I'll say 3 things got me through this journey: my faith in God, Sherry, my family and kids, and additionally Tyler, because he was just a tower of power, and I leaned on him a lot. I have a praise report. Tyler is doing great, and he is engaged to a wonderful young lady named Emily, and they are getting married on May 22nd, and you are all invited. I actually have 3 sons, so Tyler, Carson, and Chase. Carson is my middle son, and he also has PRPL 31. And this makes 5 generations our family has battled against retinitis pigmentosa. The Foundation Fighting Blindness, incredible doctors like Jean Bennett, Eric Pierce, and other researchers are giving hope and sight to the blind. I just say, if you have an inherited retina disease, I urge you to go get DNA testing and to register in the Retina Tracker. If you don't know your specific DNA defect, you can't be part of human trials. Now, Carson and Maddie gifted us with our first grandbaby in February, and Hank just happens to be here, so I'm going to introduce you to him. This is Carson, and this is baby Hank. And I am confident, because of the work the Foundation Fighting Blindness is doing, that we are on the verge of eradicating blindness. So I would say, join the good fight. Failure is not an option. Hey, he steals the show every time. Thank you.
Tracy, hi to everyone. Thank you so much for introducing us to your family.
He just happened to be here. Opportunity.
Just a coincidence. Well, Tracy, thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Thank you for your modeling of like indefatigable fatherly behavior. There's so much in that story. So thank you for giving it to us. Also, thank you for your sense of humor. You had us laughing out loud at the opening part of you running around in the Russian Olympics in the hallway. Tracy, thank you for your story.
Thank you.
I want to take just a second to bring up all of our storytellers. Well, I think not everybody has a baby with them to steal the show. We do want to bring up everybody so that we can say thank you. Ellen, thank you for joining us here today. Shannon, thank you for your research and your work. Carolyn, thank you so much. Charlie, thank you so much. And Tracy. Hi. With that, we'd like to thank the Foundation Fighting Blindness. We so appreciate their willingness to put this show together, their thoughtfulness and their stewardship of all these stories, but not just these stories, so many others on their website and in their podcast. I want to take just a second again to say this has been a taping of the Beacon Story podcast, and it is supported by the Allergan Foundation. And this is just a little part of all the work they do. We are so lucky to have them here. We have one more message from the foundation as a wrap up to the show, but thank you for joining us, and thank you again to all of our storytellers.
Vision loss doesn't define us.
And we are here to let those challenged with blinding retinal diseases know
That together we are stronger.
We are the Foundation
Fighting Blindness. Join the fight at fightingblindness.org.